The world is so big and so many people have different hobbies, cultures, and customs. Today I will talk about a hobby I started recently, and more than a hobby, I see it as a form of art, the art of skate shoes collecting, and how it started. For a large part of my life, I wore skate shoes for the durability, appearance, not always for comfort. And because I tried skateboarding, just tried. But I never thought about start a collection. It seemed like an unnecessary expense. I watched a video about shoes and I never understood why someone would collect shoes or collect anything, especially because I always saw people collect Nike shoes and I've never liked Nike shoes that much. But at the peak of my poser life, I discovered a shoe that I fell in love with, the Osiris D3, the most poser shoe ever. Alright, maybe that's not the best thing for my image, but there was a problem. I live in Brazil, and those Saras don't sell shoes here. Brazil! Well, my story ends here. Well, just kidding. I've always loved chunk shoes, and for years, I could find any. Well, we live in the era of skinny dogs. Fit the dog, man. Sometime later, I discovered a YouTube channel about skate shoes. Not shoes in general, just skate shoes. It's such a specific niche. The channel was by Maut Zumbi, and that's where I introduced to this world. At that time, chunky shoes were making a comeback. I've started seeing more of them on the streets, especially a model called Tesla Coil, a Brazilian shoe that became part of the chunk shoe revival here. Well, we had chunk shoes before, of course. We had Kicks, we had Plasma, we had Hawks, but Plasma had been gone for several years. And Kicks, well, fit the dog, man. The Tesla Coil felt like a thing of hope. What I didn't know was that chunky shoes had already been making a comeback for a while. Gradually, I started seeing more sneakers like that one on the street. That's when I discovered groups dedicated to buying and selling skate shoes. Slowly, I've stopped looking like just a pair of shoes. I was discovered a community around them. People who talk about skate shoes, bought them, sold them, revealed them, and even collect them. It wasn't just about buying or selling shoes anymore. It was a culture, and that made me interested in this subject. To give some context, besides the Saras, some of the world's most important skate shoe brands aren't sold here in Brazil, as America, Etnis, Circa. I wasn't even familiar with those brands. But do you remember when I mentioned the brand Kicks? It was a few seconds ago. I ended up getting a pair of kick shoes, a model called Kicks Glory. Can we just not comment on the reference? We all know what spirit the design of the shoes. And after years, here I was with my first pair of chunky shoes. Not the first pair of my life, but it had been a long time. Unfortunately, I only had this pair for a long time, so I completely wore out the sole. And today, it's difficult to walk in this. But these shoes made me realize how much I liked this style. A few years later, through the groups I mentioned before, I bought my first shoe that wasn't sold in Brazil, the DVS Enduro Her, in this colorway. I absolutely loved this colorway. At that point, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I could buy my dream shoe, the Osiris D3. And it was because of DVS that I met someone very important to the story. Hunter, the owner of OG Skate Shoes, an Instagram page that buys skate shoes and imports them to Brazil. Then one night at a dancehall event in downtown São Paulo, my expectations became a reality. He sold Osiris shoes. It's important to mention that the exchange rate between the US dollar and the Brazil real average around 5 to 1, and import taxes can nearly double the final price. The US federal minimum wage works out to roughly 1,200 per month, and those Osiris shoes cost about 10.6% of that monthly income. But here in Brazil, the same shoe can represent around 80 20% of minimum wage salary. At the same time, I wanted to buy the G3, but I kept thinking about the price. It seemed so unnecessary. At that point, I still wasn't thinking about starter collection, but that brick-shaped shoe just won't leave my mind. And then it happened. I bought another shoe, not the D3 yet, the DVS Comanche. Be careful. Who are you? An idiot, man. And you are spending money unnecessary. According to my calculations, you want to be able to buy another pair of shoes anytime soon. According to my calculations, you can try shutting up your mouth. Honestly, this was the shoe I wore the most. In fact, I still wear it a lot. And so I started talking about shoes, searching for shoes, buying shoes, dreaming about shoes. Alright, that's probably not very healthy. I was starting to understand why people collect shoes or collect anything. Really, it's something you only understand once you start doing it yourself. You begin to enjoy it. And at the moment in my life, when I wasn't feeling very good, this hobby was one of the things that distracted me. Maybe that was the reason I became so passionate about it, but I was still in the feeling that this hobby was something unnecessary, continued to grow. And then I bought the tree. In wrong side. I had to sell the shoe after 2 weeks. But that didn't bother me. I continued buying shoes, learn about the culture, and get more involved in it. I didn't care about money. I only care about spending on shoes. After a long time and after buying a few more pair of shoes, I finally got the D3 in my size. At this point, I was starting to accept that I did become a collector. My shoes are basically part of my bedroom's decorations now. I know, being a collector, it's more than just having a few pair of shoes. I am still in love with skate shoes. Sometimes I spend too much money on them, but it's a hobby that I really enjoy. Over time, I started to understand more about this world. Well, in fact, aside from shoes like the DC Card Graphic and a few models, these kinds of shoes have always been niche. Before I got into the scooter, I had never seen models like the Kaylee's one through Chet Thomas 4 XL and many others that were so important to skate shoes culture. And I know there is still a huge amount of information out there. So many things left to learn. I am only at the beginning of this journey. And everything around it makes me feel that it's more than just a culture. It's a form of art. The art of skate shoes collecting.